For years, we've been talking about the transition to IPv6. For most organizations, they have been able to punt this down the road. Well, this is no longer the case. The explosive growth of mobile devices and cloud adoption, organizations will need to complete this transition to IPv6. Many network engineers and security practitioners have not focused on the skills required to properly migrate to IPv6. The demand for these skills will be in high demand. Not only understanding how IPv6 works and how to migrate, but the security risks associated with this protocol and how to mitigate. Now is the time to add this valuable skill set, so keep listening.
Do you want a career in cybersecurity? Are you unsure how to start? Curious what it means to be a cybersecurity professional? This is the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast with Dr. Jeff Colburn. He's a 30-year industry professional and the founder of Team Caveo, a company that specializes in helping people launch cyber careers. Join us on this podcast as we explore what it means to be a cybersecurity professional and how to get started. Welcome to the show.
Are you curious if a cyber career is right for you? Do you want to get into cyber and don't know where to start? Are you working in IT and looking to grow? Well, schedule a one-on-one cyber career coaching session with me to discuss where you are currently and how you can best move forward. Go to coaching.cyberjobhacks.com or click the link in the show notes to schedule your session today. Welcome to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Colburn. There's a lot of buzz around automation, AI, and ML right now, and they're definitely having an impact on the industry. However, there's something that's not getting that same level of attention, and that's IPv6. And the reason for that is probably because we've been talking about IPv6 since the 90s, and how we need to migrate off IPv4 to IPv6. But now is a time we really need to start taking that serious, right? It needs the attention that AI and ML is receiving because it is going to have impact on our networks in the very near future. And many of us don't even realize that IPv6 is being implemented today. It has been implemented today. Several large service providers, Google, and even Meta have made this transition to IPv6. Federal agencies, they have IPv4 and v6 running in the networks. We refer to this as dual stack. And now they have this mandate where they have to complete the transition to IPv6 only in the very near future, right? If you look at civilian government agencies, they are now mandated to be 80% IPv6 by the year end of 2025. Now, many of them are going to miss that milestone because they haven't even really started yet. But it tells you IPv6 is now a priority, and many of these agencies are going to start making, addressing this mandate during the next technology refresh or even sooner. And another thing that many of us may not realize is that our Windows and Mac OS operating systems are already running IPv6. So there's going to be, in the very near future, there's going to be this IPv6 push from getting, finishing that transition from IPv4 to IPv6. And there's a reason for this. And there's a big reason for this. And because, why do we need to come off IPv4? It's been implemented globally. Every organization is using v4. There's, so many devices out there that need to be, transitioned. Why do we need to do this? And there's a big reason, and that's IPv4 address exhaustion. There's just no more public IPv4 address space available. We used it up. It's all gone. And we're going to continue to need more because we keep adding mobile devices and we keep, having IoT devices, meaning your automobile, your heating and air system, your doorbell, uh, your refrigerator, everything is now IP enabled and connected to some sort of internet controller, and that all requires address space, and it's just not enough IPv4 space for that. So we have to move to IPv6, which offers more address space. Now, how much more address space? Well, just think about it, right? So IPv4 used a 32-bit address space, and that provided 4.3 billion unique IP addresses. Now, IPv6 uses 128-bit address space. That permits about 340 undecilin unique addresses. Now, if you're like me, you don't even know what undecilin is, right? So just imagine 10 to the 24th trillion addresses. So that's more than plenty. Once everything moves to IPv6, addressing won't be an issue anymore. We're not going to run out. You just can't run out with that amount of address space. But there's other reasons, right? That's the big one, and that's probably going to be the driver to get people to move to V6 is just because of the addressing issue. But there are some efficiencies from moving from IPv4 to IPv6. One, if you know IPv4, then you're very familiar with broadcasts and ARP, right? Those like you can't have IPv4 without ARP. So, but with IPv6, there is no more broadcasts, there is no more ARP, right? It's multicast and it uses a neighbor discovery protocol. So these are more efficient ways of operating than IPv6. But so if we had such limited address space, and this is not a new issue, well, how were we able to delay this transition for so long? And it's three letters: NAT, network address translation. We started implementing network address translation and the use of private address space. So RFC 1918 identifies 3 blocks of addresses that are not publicly routable, meaning they can't go out on the internet. So organizations started using this private address space within their network, and anytime they needed to communicate outside their network, say the internet, they would translate it to a public address. So you had this private address, and then when it needed to go to the public, it would just get translated or mapped to a public address, because not all the organization's devices need to communicate to the outside world, and not all of them at the same time. So it permitted a smaller pool of public addresses. But even if that was running low, then you had something called port address translation. And what this did was allowed several private addresses to be translated to a single public address, right? So now you're using layer 4 port information to track the session. So you could have all your private addresses mapping to a single public address. And a lot of times in smaller organizations, they would just use the public address of the interface attached to their service provider, and they would just NAT to that address. But even NAT is starting to reach its limitations. Service providers started doing what's called double NAT or super NAT, where they would NAT their customer devices within the service provider network, and then they would NAT again when that customer's device needed to communicate outside that service provider network. So you had this NAT and then NAT again. Well, that's becoming less effective, because now you have this increased use of cloud services, mobile devices, and now you're starting to have a shift away from traditional client server traffic patterns to more peer-to-peer traffic patterns. So trying to NAT all this traffic is becoming less efficient and actually creating issues, right? Because NAT can break things. So you have to be careful how you NAT and the means in which you NAT. So we're going to get to a point where we're not going to be able to just use NAT as that Band-Aid. That Band-Aid it's bought us time, but its time has ended. So what has happened is now you have, a lot of network engineers, a lot of security practitioners. They've really been kind of putting IPv6 off. They, really just kind of focusing on IPv4 and the how to route IPv4, the risk of IPv4, and how to mitigate IPv4. So you have this big gap in the IPv6 skill set, right? The knowledge base is not there. Very few people understand how the protocol works, the differences between IPv6 and v4, how the routing protocols work with IPv6, and how to secure IPv6. What's the risk, and how do you mitigate those risks? So there's an opportunity here, right? Because there's going to be a demand for this skill set, and those who know it are going to be highly sought after. So this is the time to start learning IPv6. So, what should you learn today? Well, you should really learn first. You want to learn how IPv6 protocol works. Right? It's not the same as v4. How it discovers neighbors and gateway routers is different, right? Like I said, there's no broadcast traffic, there's no ARP. The addressing is different, so besides being, 120 bits versus 32 bits, it's IPv6 also uses hexadecimal, and it's divided into these 8 groups of 16 bits, right? IPv4 was, 4 octets, and it was written in dotted decimal notation, right? So even that, like learning IPv6 addressing, how the subnet IPv6 addressing, right? It's different than v4. The way you approach subnetting is different in v6 versus v4. The other thing you got to be mindful of is like sending devices don't fragment. I mean, only sending devices fragment traffic. Routers can't fragment traffic anymore. So v6 uses something called path MTU discover, right? It's going to determine the maximum MTU across a path, and it's going to let the sending device know, hey, this is the maximum MTU that you can send. So there's different mechanisms in place. The same, like today we use DHCP to obtain our IPv4 address for a lot of our workstations or endpoints. Well, IPv6 supports DHCP, but it also has protocols like Slack, which allows you to auto-configure interface addresses. So again, these are things you're going to have to learn about. Besides IPv6 protocol and the addressing, you got to understand how the routing protocols work with IPv6. So like OSPF, right? OSPF v2, which we commonly use with IPv4, doesn't support IPv6. You have to move to OSPF v3, which supports IPv6 and IPv4, but it operates as IPv6. You need IPv6 running in your network in order for OSPF v3 to work, right? It's going to appear to its neighbors using IPv6. BGP supports IPv6 as a new address family, right? So you got to learn the nuances of that, because even if you enable that address family, if it's still running across IPv4 and your neighbor's IP4 addresses, all of a sudden you're learning IPv6 routes with IPv4 next hop addresses. So you have to learn those nuances. Well, how do I not only learn those IPv6 prefixes, but how do I learn IPv6 next hop addresses, right? So you start understanding these routing protocols and the nuances associated with this, right? Your migration to IPv6 is going to be less painful. Then you want to learn the migration strategies, right? Just knowing IPv6 is not going to be enough, right? You're going to have IPv4, and then you want to get to IPv6. Well, it's not going to happen overnight. You can't just turn on IPv6 and turn off IPv4. These two protocols will have to coexist for some time. We're not just talking months. It could be years, right? And IPv6 devices are going to need to communicate with IPv4 devices. That might be legacy applications that don't support IPv6, right? So you got to learn these migration strategies. You got to have to learn about dual stack. You have to learn about IPv6 tunneling, DNS 6.4 and NAT 6.4, right? These are all going to be part of your migration strategy. And you have to learn these technologies and when and how to implement them. So if you do learn IPv6 and you do learn these migration strategies, you're going to be ahead of the most. Like I was saying, a lot of people continue to ignore IPv6. They don't want to bother to learn it. They just want to continue to NAT as long as they can. A lot of people are intimidated by the large address space and trying to remember things in hexadecimal. But what's going to happen is you got this knowledge gap, and all of a sudden you're going to have this sudden and great demand for people who know IPv6 and how to migrate off IPv4. And this is going to come quickly because you have these companies that have this cloud first adoption frame mindset, and that's just going to drive the need for IPv6. And like I said, federal agencies, they're already under a mandate to be IPv6 only. So it's coming fast, and those who are prepared for it are going to be in high demand. It's going to create opportunities for people that know V6. So this is not just for the network engineer, right? This is going to impact security practitioners as well. If you're a network security engineer, or just a network engineer that deals with security, or just any security practitioner, you're going to have to know IPv6, right? Because there's risk associated with, right? And that's not the same risk associated with IPv4. There's new risks associated with V6, right? So much like you had ARP poisoning for that, that were used for man-in-the-middle attacks, now you're going to have neighbor discovery protocol spoofing for attackers that are trying to accomplish the same thing, right? They're trying to direct traffic to their devices, so they'll spoof neighbor discovery protocol, right? Then you have like neighbor advertisements or router advertisement flooding, right? That could be used to overwhelm devices, right? People could use IPv6 tunnels to bypass IPv4 security controls. You could have rogue router advertisements that could, be sent to direct devices to malicious gateways. And if you don't understand IPv6 and you don't understand its dependence on ICMPv6, you could break IPv6, right? Because one of the big things is the path MTU discovery, right? That's an ICMPv6 message. If you block that on the firewall, then you're going to break IPv6. It's not going to be able to get that path MTU path information back to the source, right? So you have to learn these things to be a security practitioner in the future, because you're going to have to know V4 and V6. So, just kind of wrap things up. IPv6 can no longer be ignored, right? You have to develop and understand IPv6, how to migrate off IPv4, right? You have to learn this, and this is going to put you in a high demand skill set, because not only do you know IPv6, you know how to migrate to it, you know how to coexist with IPv4. And I know, a lot of people just starting out, like say, hey, I'm just starting in an industry, I barely understand IPv4. I get it. Yeah, IPv4, even that, when you're first learning it, even subnetting can be difficult. But I'm telling you, now is the time to learn both. You don't want to put it off, right? Because those who can understand both, right, you're going to be in a good position, right? Because you got to know IPv6, you got to learn the security risks and the proper mitigation, right? You got to know how to secure IPv4. You're going to need to know how to secure IPv6, because these two protocols are going to coexist on the same network. So you have to have the security controls for both, right? And if you have this, right, during this transition period until IPv4 is fully retired, right, if you possess those expertise in both protocols, you're going to be highly sought after. So, anyone who's, plans to be in this industry for some time, be there as a network engineer or security practitioner, you got to know IPv6. You can't forget about IPv4, but you got to learn IPv6. You got to learn how to move to IPv6, and you got to learn how to allow these two protocols to coexist. So I hope you found this helpful today. If you did, I always love to hear your feedback in the show notes. If you have a different opinion, if you say, hey, no, Jeff, that's not the way things are going to go, or no, we're not there yet, hey, just let me know. I always love to hear different perspectives. That's how we learn and grow. So again, I hope you found this useful. Until next time, have a great week. Do you want to be part of an online community of like-minded people? Join us at cyberjobhacks.com, where you'll receive the latest industry news, cybersecurity career trends, invitation to free events, and exclusive offers. So join our private Facebook group at cyberjobhacks.com.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Job Hacks Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, please share with a friend who may be interested in becoming a cyber professional. Also, please leave a review on Apple Podcast. Your feedback is greatly appreciated as it will shape our future episodes. Meet us here every Monday as we discuss the cyber job market and how to launch your career. Until next time, have a great week.